mean, awesome. So finally, I've been able to figure out my screens here. Great. So hi everyone, I am Shiva, and I work as a senior product designer at Intuit. I am based out of Bangalore, but right now I'm here in California. Great. Don't have to wake up early in the morning to deliver this talk or to have some Q&A, talk to you guys. Like, what are you feeling? What are your um vibe around the whole product right now? Um, So today I want to talk about something that sounds very simple, but is actually also very powerful. Thinking like a product designer. So this isn't about tools. This is not about how you work with AI. This is not about Figma, the UI trends, or making things look really, really good while you present to the judges, or maybe later on in when you go to the industry and how do you solve the problems there. It's about how you think, because the way you approach this protothon is kind of same way you'll also approach real life world problems later in your career. So what we'll try to do is we'll try to draw some parallels between how can you solve better during this protothon, and then how can you use the same learning later on when you move to the industry, right? So that being said, in this weekend, while you'll be working here, most teams here will be building fast, right? And that's expected. It's hackathon, right? So everyone here is planning to build fast, move to the solution, and then how better do you work on the proto? How do you better do you work on the visuals? The whole focus kind of shifts in hackathon. And mind you, something similar happens in the industries as well, many a times. You'll move quick, you'll make decisions quickly, build quickly, right? And some teams will even build something that looks really, really impressive, but a very few teams will actually build the right thing. And the difference is not on the effort that you put. The difference is not about the talent. Rather, it comes down to how you think, right? And where do you spend your time during the whole hackathon? And later on, again, where do you spend your whole time in during the whole design sprint that you'll be working later on? So giving you an idea of what hackathons are, again, they don't change how product building works. They just compress it, right? Um, the same mistakes that team make here in companies over months, over weeks, and sometimes over years as well, happens here in hackathons or protothon here in this case within hours. You won't have lots of time to actually make mistakes as well, right? The same wrong assumptions, the same research that goes into the same confusion, sometimes the same overbuilding the product, having too many features on something that we're building. All of these things happens in this industry that also happens in the hackathon, just faster within hours. So what you do here is actually practice for how you will work in the real world later on. So all the learnings that you come here for, all the things that you learn as designers, as teams in hackathons, are kind of which reflects in your later part of your life, in your career as well. So it's really important to think about the principles, how you want to approach the problem statements, how you want to approach the different problem areas in this hackathon, and then how might you use that learnings later on in your career as well. Now, imagine that you have gotten the different briefs, and if your first step is opening Figma, then you're designing for pixels, right? You're not designing for product. The tools make you feel productive very quickly. You start creating screens, you start creating flows, you think about the components that you'd want to have in your application or your product, whatever that you're designing there. And it feels like somewhere in your mind that you're making progress, right? You feel productive. So as soon as you have problem and you start solving it, you feel like a problem solver there itself. But it makes, but the if the thinking behind it is not clear enough, you're just building faster, but maybe you're heading to the wrong direction, right? So Speed again feels like a progress. It gives you momentum. It feels good while you're designing something, while you're working on something, this team collaboration happening. But what matters a lot is also the direction. So because you can move very fast, still end up in the wrong place. Yeah, you can build a complete prototype with all the animations, with all the micro animation that you'd want to add, with all the visuals, the way you'd want it to have, and still solve the wrong problem. And at that point, and at that, all that speed doesn't really help you. What you really want to do is solve the right problem. And to do that, what's more
So
important?
let's pause for a second. I think someone else's screen is sharing right now. Mm. Okay, you're back. Can everyone see Shiva's screen again?
Oh, okay.
Cool. No one else share their screen, please.
Great. I hope you saw the screen as my last slide as well. But you were able to hear me, right, throughout?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. So I lost my chain of thought. You're building prototype. Okay. So what matters is not the speed, but speed with the direction. So what we call in industry is velocity, right? You would want to move fast, but then you'd also would want to move in the right direction. This term is not very popularized somehow, even in the industry. You hear that we move fast in our organization. You hear terms like we move very fast in our startup. It's a fast-paced startup, right? And everyone there talks about speed. Uh, but then do you actually take a pause to think about what actually are you solving? So that is something that matters a lot. And I would love that if you'd spend some time out of your hackathon and then ask yourself some questions. So before you build anything, you need to slow down and just enough to ask better questions. Who is this for? Right? What are they struggling with? And why does it matter? And what happens if you don't solve it? So there are multiple other questions apart from this that you might want to ask yourselves. So these are just the high level questions. You might want to ask multiple follow-ups, right? So who is this for? Maybe a student. What kind of students? Where do they reside? Uh, are they school students or college going students? And lots more. So the more questions that you ask, it makes your makes your problem framing more crisp, more clear, and then that helps you head to the right direction of problem solving. Most ideas sound good at a very high level, but when you try to answer questions like this, that is where actually the gap starts showing. And I can talk to you about this using some case studies as well. Uh, the most famous case study that people bring up is Airbnb, but I will not be talking about the visuals right now. Um, it's a great example of how Airbnb solved a problem very correctly. So I'll tell you a story. So in the early days, they were struggling with bookings. The bookings were very low, and they thought maybe it's a demand problem. They were not able to actually solve what's happening, what's going wrong. Is it the code issue? Is it the design issue? And when they actually looked closer, they realized that the problem was somewhere else. And the problem was something very different. The listings that were there in Airbnb's application had bad photos. Now, people didn't trust what they were seeing, right? The bad photos did not give good vibe to the people to actually go ahead and book those listings there. And that's why bookings kind of dropped there. So instead of redesigning the whole product, instead of adding more features to it, instead of revamping the way their product looks like, they focused on the right problem. They improved the photos. What they did is the team moved to some of the nearby listings, clicked better photos themselves, uploaded them, and then that changed everything. Better understanding was there, and people were able to see those better, good quality photos, able to trust more, and then booking kind of rocketed. So what the team did here was they paused instead of um, building something on top of the product that they already had. They tried to pause and look at the right problem, and then they solved it very efficiently. They didn't have to go through all the design spins. They didn't have to go through all the code reviews. The solution was somewhere else where they had to just upload a better quality images of that. So in a hackathon, again, if you misunderstand the problem, you start building wrong thing very fast. Like it looks complete, it feels like progress, but then it fails where it matters, right? And similarly, that happens in the real world as well. The exact same thing where the same problem, the same solution, but then it just takes months to realize that were we building the right thing or were we building the wrong thing? And that is where user research comes very handy for the teams there as well, and here in Hackathon as well, right? So looking at the problem with different lenses, looking at the problem from the lens of the users are very important there as well. Now, teams often build features that nobody needs, right? They invest time, effort, resources, and then realize too late that the foundation itself is wrong. So skipping the problem definition does not actually save time, it just delays the failure. So it's very important. And out of the weekend that you have to work on the problem statement that you'll be doing that, utilize some time, utilize some initial time to actually frame the problem statement, to actually get deeper into the problem that you'd want to solve, rather than thinking with starting with the solution that you have in your mind. Discard the first five, six ideas that are there because those are the most common ideas that anyone would have. So start questioning multiple times. Who are you solving for? Why are you doing this? How is it helping? And that pause that you will be where you won't be creating anything will help you with a better direction in the rest of the hackathon as well. So once you understand the problem, the next challenge is deciding what matters. Because the instinct is to do more, right? Add more features, solve more problems, cover more ground. Like my application can do this, do that. My users, when they come to the application, they will be able to do this, X, Y, Z, and whatnot, right? But you don't win by doing more. You win by doing what actually matters. So this is where the clarity beats complexity. So your job is not to add features. It's to remove confusion. Every feature you add is something that the user has to understand. Every option that you introduce is another decision that they have to make, right? So a good design reduces thinking. It makes things more obvious. Imagine Netflix, right? They have a plethora of series and movies and documentaries that you can actually watch. But the way they've designed the their homepage is where you don't have to think a lot before you choose, right? They have an options to they understand by your algorithm how so they understand by your algorithm that what could be the next top recommendation for you, what kind of series or what kind of movies are you into, right? And that kind of solves a problem for us. Like there are thousands of movies and series that we don't have to actually choose from. Another example that I can give you is Instagram. So Instagram didn't actually start as Instagram, right? It was acquired. So it started as an application called Bourbon, and it had lots of features like check-ins, plans, and so and so. And it tried to do everything in the beginning. But the founders noticed one thing, that the people were not actually using all these features in the application, but they were focusing on only one part of the whole application, which was the photos. And they decided that they want to remove and let go of all the rest of the features and only focus on photos there. And that clarity is what made it successful, right? It's a very successful photo application that came up with photo-based social media that came up with. So always ask yourself this: what is that one thing your product must do really well? Not five things, not 10 features, one clear purpose. And if that's not clear, everything else becomes harder. If that purpose is not clear, ask yourself more questions. Try to delve deeper into the problem statement. And when you do that, you'll start gaining more clarity about what are you solving, why are you solving, and who are you solving for. Ask multiple questions to yourselves. And when that purpose is clear enough for you, you'll see that the direction that you will take to solve that problem would be very much different that you'd have taken on the first hour of hackathon itself. So in a hackathon, you don't have time to do everything, right? You cannot, and again, judges don't expect you to create a fully functional application that will be used by thousands of folks out there. So you have to choose, pick one thing and do it really well. And similar things also happens in the real world. They don't have time constraints, right? If I have an application, I can go and building on it one feature after the other one. The restrictions there are on the resources, right? Coding takes a lot of resources. Designing takes a lot of resources. Interacting with the customer takes lots of resources. So the companies also have to prioritize, right? Which feature uh, helps them connect better with the customers? Which feature, which part of improvement in the product help the customer get their jobs done easily, more intuitively, right? And thus focus protects your product. It keeps it very clear. So similar thoughts, similar chain of solutions here in hackathon as well. Try to pick one thing and do it really well. And then you may think about many other features that is going to support it. But then the purpose of the application that you build should be very clear. We do say that in hackathons, we build the MVP. When the startups form their first application, they build with MVP. And there's lots of misconception about MVP as well. It is often misunderstood by people. People think it means building a smaller version of everything, and that's not what it is, right? An MVP is the sharpest version of one thing. It's about proving value clearly and not spreading efforts thin. You cannot focus on a lot of things to add into the MVP. You rather start with one simple idea, one simple purpose, and then that's how you launch an MVP. And after that, you start prioritizing the rest of the things that you'd wanted to add, the rest of the features, the rest of the product areas, which will help you build a better product, connect with the customer better, make it more efficient, right? While if you have not thought enough on your MVP and you have built, let's say, 10 different features, it's very difficult to explain the whole thing to your end users, to the end customers. And if you had to explain your UI, it's already failed. In real world, users don't wait, right? If they install your application, they come to your web page, and if they're not able to understand, just switch to your competitors. Then there are a plethora of competitors out there. Similarly, judges also in hackathons don't wait. They do, people don't read instructions carefully, right? They decide very quickly. So your design needs to be very obvious. It needs to start making sense as soon as someone sees it, as soon as anyone sees what you're trying to build, right? Let's look at another example. When Apple launched iPod, they didn't talk about storage. They didn't talk about the technical specs, right? They understood who their end customers were, not tech savvy people, right? If you go and tell them, and maybe someone of that generation when tech wasn't overpowering our society, they were not able to understand what a hard drive would do. They would not understand what 6 GB RAM would do, right? Explaining that as what you're trying to solve would be very difficult. Maybe if Steve Jobs actually explained it that way, people would not have bought iPods at all because it would be too technical for someone to actually buy it. Rather, what they did is they said 1,000 songs in a pocket, right? Now that solves for a purpose, right? That's what people actually understood. And that's what actually people remembered. So clarity is not about simplifying your features, it's about simplifying the understanding as well, right? So if I were to tell you 6 GB RAM and 12 GB hard drive and multiple different cameras, people might not even able to understand. Now that we have moved to a more tech savvy world, we are able to understand some bits of it. But then again, there are people who won't be able to understand something a lot tech savvy terms. So always look at who you are building for, and then what are they actually looking for from your product, right? Why would they buy your product? Why would they subscribe to your product? And why would they download your product if you're building something for them? Again, simplicity is not less effort, right? It's more of thinking there. It takes time to remove unnecessary things. The example of Bourbon, right? So if they had already built features in their application, they had to let go of features that were unnecessary to focus on the right direction. So it's not that if your product is simple, you have not put enough effort onto it. It rather says that you have put more thinking on it. You'd want to focus in the right direction, right? Um, anyone can make something very complex, but making it simple is that something that really works. In a hackathon, again, judges often form impression very quickly. In seconds, if the idea is clear, it lands. If it's confusing, it doesn't, right? And that happens everywhere in the real world as well. If you have looked at Shark Tank, the 1 minute pitch, or any other similar shows, you'll be able to understand that if the startup founders don't talk about the right problem, if they don't talk about the clear approach, how they're solving it, the sharks get confused, right? You as an audience would also get confused. And similarly, in real world, people behave somewhat very similar. So they don't complain. So if you have built an application which is complex, people won't come and complain to you. They won't give you detailed feedback that this isn't working, that isn't working, I'm confused. They just leave. And that silence becomes the answer for most of the times. So again, clarity is something that beats over complexity. And that is where the focus of the designer should be. Now that we have moved into AI first design process for most of the times, right? You ask Claude, you ask ChatGPT, what are the 10 features that I need to build for a food delivery application, right? And then you'll get 15 different features, 20 different features. But then if you start building everything, are you building it for the users or are you building it for yourself? The users might not use all the different features that you are actually thinking about, right? Think about the outcome and design for that outcome. So, the focus should not be about designing the screens, but it should be about designing the outcomes. Think about what really changes for the users, what becomes easier, what becomes faster, what becomes clearer. If the change is not obvious, then maybe the design is not complete. Maybe you need to have some more clarity, right? Why am I designing this? Why am I doing this? How is my user benefiting from this, right? Why would they come here and then use my application? Why would they come and use my product, right? Why would they not go to a competitor? Multiple questions to for yourselves to ask yourselves. And if the answer is not obvious enough, maybe you need to ask more questions until you get the clarity. So what I'm proposing is to just pause and think, are you solving the right problem, right? And then look at what actually matters. Focus on what actually matters. And then you have ample of time to build. When you build it, are you making it very clear for your audience to understand? In this hackathon, for the judges to understand, in the real world, for your users to understand. Because tools will change. So as soon as you get your brief, please don't jump on Figma because the way you'd work on right now would be very different from the way you'd work 1 year later, right? Now that AI is taking over the design space as well, maybe the way you'd work with the tools would also evolve. Now that Claude has also released their designs, ChatGPT has design again, and there are multiple other AIs that are supporting designs. You might be working on different tools, but then what matters a lot is thinking. What matters is clarity. Then what matters is how do you solve a problem? And to solve that problem, how do you define the problem, right? And how much clarity do you have about the problem itself? So I'd repeat myself that everyone here will build again and build something, but not everyone will build the right thing, right? So this weekend, move fast because you have some limited time, but pause just enough to make sure that you're moving in the right direction, right? Because the teams that win are not the ones that build fast. They are the ones that actually think first. So that's my talk. That's my 2 cents. Thank you for listening to me. Um, Let me switch back to my Zoom. I will go there. Yes. Now I can see you. If do you have any questions, anything that you'd want to clarify? I'm sure that you don't have your briefs yet, but all ears to you.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand and we will call on you. I think we have one question from the Raj.
Hello, Shiva. Firstly, thank you for organizing this. My question is not specifically related to the protothon that is about to take place, but it's more related to um, uh, product. As you said right now, thinking is the differentiating factor. Uh, what is the ideal process you personally follow when you're approaching, maybe let's say if you're in my position right now, you're about to go for a hackathon, you already gave your stance, but how different is a hackathon from a real product? Because you also get a lot of time when it comes to thinking, when it comes to the product side of things, right? So how
Yeah,
would you differentiate the two and how do you approach each of them?
great question. Um, so two different planes, right? One you're building in an hackathon, the other you're building a real product, right? In both the places, there's something called release cycle or the different proportions of time that you can actually dedicate to each of the process, right? Here, you might be dedicating a lot of time in designing to come up with a product, right? In the real world, again, design gets one phase of the whole thing, right? There's user research that goes in, there's problem statement that goes in, there's development cycle that goes in, there's bugs to fixes, and lots of other things, right? So again, when we say that you have lots of ample of time in the industry, maybe not. Now that we have AI, the expectations have risen. The time has reduced there as well, right? We have faster releases now. Even then, what matters is the proportion in which you divide your whole timing, right? So if you, let's take an example of a design sprint. If you have the whole week to design for, right? The first day is only about problem definition, right? Here you don't have 5 days to do that. You have a weekend to do that. Then proportionately, maybe divide your time to think about the problem, and then proportionately think about how much time do you need to build that, and going ahead accordingly. Yeah, as well.
Okay, thank
Answer.
you.
I think we have a few questions in the chat. First one is from Miguel.
Okay. Uh, Given the time frame of the hackathon, what strategy do you recommend using to investigate the user, and how much time should we dedicate to it? That completely depends on the types of user that you are working with, Miguel, and that also depends on the problem statement that you're solving for, right? Um, First-hand interview, first-hand survey with the users are always much more beneficial and keeps you grounded about how they think. What are the things that goes in their mind when they think about the problem space that you're trying to solve for. Um, but AI also helps there, right? So you can brainstorm a lot with AI. It gives you kind of a secondary study. You get an idea of how the users think, And then you can take those assumptions and verify with your actual users. What happens there is you don't wander around with your questions when you're talking to the users, and it makes the steps much more efficient when you already have an idea about what to ask and how do you want to solve the problem, right? Again, when we say go with an assumption, it doesn't mean that you lead them with your solution. Like, I think you'd like something like that. Maybe no, right? Even if you have assumptions, keep your questions very non-leading. Ask them open questions. Let them define, let them talk about the problems. Let them talk about what they think the solution could be, right? You're not there to sell your product. You're there to learn from them, and then design a product accordingly. I hope that answers, Miguel. I'll move to M.Des question. How do you determine what matters enough to build? Maybe not just for this one, but also think about the problem statement defending. Okay, I think I didn't understand the question. How do you determine what matters enough to build? So would you like to describe a little bit more on this, Emily?
If I'm not wrong, I think she might mean like when do you think like it's done? When do you think it's the product is done designing? Like when is it enough? And you
Uh,
know you've reached a solution? Maybe I'm wrong though.
okay, so I can answer with keeping that in my mind, but then let me know, Emily, if you meant something else. Um, the problem, like, it's never enough, to be honest, right? But then just for the protothon, maybe you'd want to get into some depth. It's always about asking the right questions to yourself, right? It's not easy to ask right questions again. So out of, let's say, 15 questions that you ask yourself, 5 land in the correct area, 10 just does not matter. But then if you don't try 15 different questions to ask to yourself, maybe just start with 5, maybe 1 or 2 lands there. And that might not give you enough depth, right? So let's take an example of Airbnb, right? The products, the bookings drop, right? So first question, why is it not working? The first answer would be, is it not um, intuitive enough for someone to understand, or is it the trust issues for which the people are not booking, and a lot of other things that you could actually think about, right? Again, when it comes to trust, why are they not trusting your application? Is it because your UI is not, modern enough for them to understand? Does it look like a scammer website, or could be something else, right? Do they not trust the host who is actually uploading the photos? In this case, it was the photos, but then they have many other features that they have built on trust. And then how do you solve for it, right? So there are many other solutions, many other things that actually I cannot think of. But yeah, so if you ask questions multiple times and go to certain depth, you'll be able to understand, and there'll be an aha moment like, oh, that's why I'm not able to understand this. Maybe that's why the users are not buying this, right? And the other thing is when you browse online, you'll see multiple ideas that has been built on a similar problem statement. Not all of them works, right? Maybe a research on that is why something works and something other does not work also helps there. Okay, so moving to the next question, how do you brainstorm good ideas? Okay, how do you brainstorm good ideas? Oh, that's a really good question. And even innovative ideas. Sometimes how do you identify which one is a good idea and not? Great question. Like how do we identify which one is a good idea and none, or none is we need to brainstorm more. So it's always about going to the, I think I'd repeat myself again here, is going to the depth by where you understand that are you solving the right problem itself, right? Um, at the surface level, there are many solutions to a problem statement. But then the example of Airbnb again, I think this looks a little repetitive, but then example of Airbnb again, when you go to that depth and actually understand why trust isn't working in the problem space, that helps for you to solve that problem statement here itself. So one of the example was um, IDEO was once approached by hotel chain in the US, and then they asked like, "Are we want to build something for our patients to give them a good experience?" What they expected is they'd get some good mobile application because IDEO was kind of famous for that. Uh, what instead happened is the researchers from IDEO spent hours and days in the hospitals. They just moved around. They imitated themselves as patients. The day came when they had to present the idea. And what they presented was 7 to 8 hours long video of someone sleeping on a hospital bed with a view of the ceiling, right? Because that's what the patients actually look and feel within a hospital. The solutions, the ideas, the design solution that they proposed was not an application for them. It was rather a very handy design. So they suggested to paint the ceilings very interestingly. They suggested to add some mirrors into the hospital beds, the way where if the patients look at, they would be able to interact with the nurses, their relatives who were there. So this I don't think if you actually look at the whole thing, Google up, you'll be able to see the whole case studies present in the online, somewhere online. You'll see that the solution there was not about the first thing is giving the right experience, maybe design an app for the patients to keep them engaged. Rather, it was something very, very deep to go through the experience of how they feel, what they do there, and then um, and understand their experience and then solve for it.
I think we also have a raised hand question, if we want to pivot to that for a second.
Yes, sure.
Well, Rich?
Uh, all right. Can you guys all get me? Hello? All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. So my question goes by, for this hackathon, when as a team, do you know that you've got a winning project, like a winning solution? Like after identifying a pertinent problem and going through the entire design process and building a solution that seems to solve that problem, then even going to that extent to doing some usability testing and and showing proof of concept that your solution effectively solved the problem. Like, does that guarantee that your project might win, or are there other stuff that can greatly improve your scores? Yeah, so that's my question. Thank you.
Great question. Um, I don't think there's a formula to win a hackathon or win in life, right? But then what you can do is put your efforts truthfully. Um, what you said is the design process that most of the teams would follow here, right? But then the way to win is so they can, if I were to help you with that, is were you solving the right problem, right? Is there a relevance of that problem in the real world, right? There are multiple products out there, to be honest. And if you build something which already exists, so did you actually build something new? Or did you actually solve the problem for the users, or were you just recreating something that already exists in the world? Okay? So maybe that's not the unique idea that you were thinking of. So being innovative, being thinking about all those things again requires lots of time, requires lots of dedication. But user research helps trying to understand your users there, talk to them, understand like what are the problems, where are they stuck, right? What are they actually looking?
Yeah,
They're not looking for a product. They're looking for the solution to their problems, right? If I want to, let's say, um, get food right now. So that is the problem that I want to solve for. I do not want a solution as an application that helps me deliver food to my office, to my home. right? So
Yeah.
go to the core problem. Like, what is it that you want for? And then there could be multiple ways that you can actually solve for it.
All right. Thank you very much, sir.
All right.
I think there are a couple more questions on the chat.
Yeah, I think I lost track of which last
Um,
question did I answer to?
I think you need to, I think you left off on Neil's question, so the one after that is Tonya's.
Yeah, okay. Thoughts on UI perfection versus UX strategy and solutions of the space. Yes. So again, Tonya, imagine someone has solved the right UX strategy, has solved the right problem, right? They may not have a sleek UI to present. That is still okay. Like, we do not expect you to create a perfect application within a weekend, right? But imagine someone who has a sleek UI but not solving the right problem, right? So that's definitely not something that you'd want to end up yourself at. So the thing is, how do you divide your time? How do you divide your efforts between solving for the right problem and then applying all the UX strategy to go to the right solution versus the sleek UI? Again, even if you are solving for the right problem, we would expect you to have some level of fidelity to be able to explain what you're trying to solve for, right? Which is something that intuitive enough for the judges here in the hackathon for to understand. Or when you go out and build for the real world, it's intuitive enough for the users, right? Think of us as your audiences. So if you are telling a story, your audiences should be able to understand that, right? Similarly, if you're designing something, if you're presenting an idea in form of an application, in form of a UI, your audience should be able to understand. So the way you would create a UI for a designer would be very different from the way you would create a UI for an end users, the end customers. Why? Because we do understand some of the nitty-gritties. We do understand that what a low fidelity means, right? So even if it's a low fidelity, mid fidelity level, we'd be able to understand what you actually intend to do using that application. What are the problems that you're solving and how you're solving that, right? Maybe it does not have a very sleek UI, does not have a working proto, does not have a micro animations. But then if it's solving the right problem, maybe you get more marks there. So I'm sure this rubric that would be created and that would be shared with you as well. I'm not sure the organizers can help on that. But then I'm sure that there's some allocations on UI, some allocations on UX, some allocation on strategy and the problem itself.
just to say that I think we have time for one or two more questions. So, if Shiva, do you want to pick and choose which questions you think are most relevant would be
Yeah.
helpful?
Define the right problem versus the service level ones. I think I've talked enough on this. And design the priority. How do you design the priorities of a product for the next step, especially when the user feedbacks cover more aspects? Yes, when a feedback comes in, right? Even for the real product, if you look at it, there are many parts where a user would give you feedback on, right? For businesses, what matters is which problem statement should they solve first, which will affect most of the users, right? Which will affect most of the users to do their work more efficiently, which affects their businesses more. So there are some parameters by which you add on whole feedback to look at the priority there. Similarly for the hackathons as well. Maybe you have got two different feedback. One says the button does not look great, and the other is not able to solve an issue, right? So again, how do you prioritize between the both? You look at it, what's the most basic thing that you need to solve for, right? And maybe what's the most number of quantities, or what is the most number of feedbacks coming in for which part of the product or which part of the problem that you're trying to solve. And that's how you prioritize on that. What if we are asking the questions keeping the users in mind, but the answers were more business oriented? How to tackle that? Okay, so answers are generally not business oriented. What happens is questions are generally business oriented when we are not able to detach ourselves from the business enough when we go for user research, right? Again, a user won't care about your business a lot. So let's say you are working for Uber and you're researching for Uber, right? You would ask questions about what are the issues that you face when you are booking a cab, right? And the users would be talking about their problems. They would not be talking about your business problems. Is it feasible for you or not? There might be questions about maybe the rates are high and I'm not able to afford it. In that case, maybe those are not the right kind of users that you're looking for, right? So for every problem, there would be some certain right kind of users that you'd want to focus on, and out of the huge plethora of users that you expect to be using your application. Netflix has different plans, right? Some use on phone, some use on TV, but then again, not all of us buy the most paid or the highest paid plans from them. It's because they have identified that there are different types of people who would be using different types of features and would not require all the features as well. So for some, the priorities comes from being cost effective. For some, it comes about the luxury, and that's how they divide the whole plans. And that will also show up in your researches for most of the times.
I think we have time for one more question.
Going off the UI question, how important is UI in product design? Like, you get a product having so UI is important, especially if you're solving a problem that has competitors, right? So many times what happens if, imagine if you have two different items, two different toys, functions the same, but then one looks better than the other, right? You definitely want to buy something that looks better. So similarly, for anything that is solving a problem, maybe you're going to buy a bicycle, maybe 90% of the features look same, but then you go and buy the bicycle which attracts you the most, which gives you more user delight, right? So again, delight matters in those cases. So a good UI definitely adds to it, but then solving the right problem is much more important. So if you're choosing between two bicycles, maybe you choose the one that is more comfortable when you're riding, and then you go for the second priority, which is how does it look, right? You will not buy a bicycle which looks good, but then does not function well or takes more of your effort to go to a distance. So solving the right problem first, and then solving for how does it look, how does it feel, and adding more delight to it.
I
Cool.
think,
Yeah.
yeah, well, firstly, let me just stop recording.